Hello and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic. And today we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 4, The Colosseum Showdown. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in with the episode summary. So Peyton and Sarah just finished a scan quest to get a scan of Zalvar's orb, and they decide to lock in their battle gear and see what other scans they can get. They find Cougar and Grook fighting a giant robot creature, and they can't seem to get a scan of the giant, so they port back to Chaotic, tell Tom and Kaz, and then they all go back to Underworld City. They split up to look for this giant robot creature, and Kaz and Tom run into Hearing, who take them to the Fernal Inn to get information from Cougar. At the inn, Kaz runs into Hammerdune, literally, and knocks him over. So Hammerdune challenges Rothar because Rothar made fun of him, and then Kaz to a duel in the Underworld Colosseum. Kaz asks Kaor if there's a way to get out of the duel, and he says that if Kaz backs out, he would have to unfortunately banish Kaz from the Underworld. Peyton and Sarah are still looking for the robot, and they discover him at Olmar's lab, and they discover that he's a battle gear. So Kaz stalls his match so that he can use the giant robot in his Colosseum battle as his battle gear, and he ends up doing just that and defeating Hammerdune in his one-on-one Colosseum Showdown. Analysis. So the theme of this episode is kind of don't judge a book by its cover. Both Hearing and Hammerdune are persistent that just because a creature is little doesn't mean they aren't mighty, and that kind of leads you to the lesson that you can't judge a creature by their appearances, that you can't judge their ability or their power or their stats by just the way they look, right? A creature is so much more than their appearance. They could be powerful, they could be not. A big creature could be not powerful, a small creature could be powerful. And so I feel like that is the lesson that they're trying to portray in this episode, right? Is really the cliche of don't judge a book by its cover. Don't, you know, thrust expectations onto a creature just because of the way they look. But the thing is, I don't know how hard they hammer that theme down, if you will, because at the end of the day, Kaz does defeat Hammerdune, right? They portray that Hammerdune is powerful by him defeating Rothar, and we understand that Rothar is like a formidable opponent, and so they teach that lesson that way. But at the end of the day, Kaz, who is not powerful, but is, a decent chaotic player, defeats Hammerdune in the battle just kind of by luck. And so, even though this theme has an undercurrent in the episode, it's not like truly really explicit or, hitting you over the head with it. You gotta look for it, if you will. But secondarily, I think there's another theme that can be extrapolated by the character of Hammerdune, and that kind of comes from his insecurity about his height, right? Now, Rothar and the other Underworlders are, how would you say, not sensitive to that insecurity? They're pretty rude and they make fun of him and they know that he's insecure of it, and so that's kind of like bullying, if you will. But like Rothar is pretty rude and escalates the situation. But did Kaz do anything inherently wrong by accidentally knocking into Hammerdune and knocking him over? No, not necessarily, right? He tried to apologize. He tried to be like, that was an accident. I'm so sorry. And, he kind of, does everything right by human standards. Is it 100% like he handled that perfectly? Obviously not. But even just like an allusion to Hammerdune's height was enough to trigger Hammerdune and enough to trigger him to challenge Kaz. And so, with that information, it's not information that Kaz could have known. Like, he's never met Hammerdune before, he doesn't know him, so he doesn't know to be sensitive about Hammerdune's relationship to his own appearance and height. And, that's okay because he doesn't know him, but he does have to deal with the ramifications of it. Like, he still has to deal with the consequences of Hammerdune being insecure about his height and therefore challenging Kaz to a Colosseum showdown, if you will. And so I think there's a lesson there about, you never really know what somebody's going through, or you never really know what issues somebody is dealing with behind the scenes. Like, you can do everything right, so to speak, and still have to deal with an issue because another person thrusts that issue upon you. Kaz, with that initial run-in, he handled it pretty well until like Rothar stepped in and escalated the situation, but Kaz still had to go to battle at the Colosseum. And even like I would say the moment where Kaz really flubs it is when he tries to grovel of like, he was complimenting Hammerdune and then calls him puny, even though he knows the height is a sensitive topic, right? So that's where Kaz really fumbles the ball. But up until that point, Kaz tried to apologize for knocking him over, but Hammerdune was embarrassed. And so even though Kaz like handled it pretty well, he still had to deal with the consequences of those actions. And so pulling that theme is like sometimes you have to deal with an issue because somebody else makes it your issue, not because you created an issue. You know, and isn't that interesting? But with that, the kind of plot of this episode is we do have kind of a cause and effect aspect here of, Peyton and Sarah saw the robot and they tell Kaz. So Kaz goes to the underworld and runs into Hearing. So Hearing brings him to the inn and he runs into Hammerdune. So Hammerdune like challenges him to the match. Right? We have kind of a domino effect plot structure here. And it's not necessarily something Kaz sought out to do. It was like, let's go see if we can get a battle at the Colosseum. But, all of these domino effects lead to him having to do this battle. And, Kaz is the A plot, Peyton and Sarah are the B plot. It's not a particularly complex episode setup or structure, but, it's entertaining. So, on to lore. We do get a little bit of scanner lore in this episode. They confirm the already established rules of the world that you can only have one scan of each scannable in your scanner at a time, and that you can scan over your previous scan. So you can only have one at a time. So if you scan something new, it'll scan over your previous scan. But the new information here is that you can lock in your scan, preventing the issue of scanning over your previous scan with that scannable type, right? So when you try to scan a battle gear, it'll give you that like, can't do that because you already locked in another battle gear. So that's interesting and probably a useful tool. We do learn about two new underworld locations. One, the Fernal Inn, which seems to be a popular meeting place to grab some grub, to socialize, to, have some lunch or dinner. And then also the Underworld Colosseum, which is huge, by the way. You would have thought that we would have been able to see it in like the underworld skyline, but we're seeing it for the first time here. And with that introduction into the Underworld Colosseum, we also learn a little bit more about the underworld and its laws. So we learn that there used to be a problem in the underworld that too many fights broke out. It was nonstop fighting in the streets. And, that's kind of violent and dangerous for your average underworld citizen. And so Kaor made the rule that if you're going to fight, you have to do it in the Colosseum. And that solved the fighting problem. And so Kaor is really out here making the streets safer for your average underworld city dweller and also bringing entertainment to the people. So at the Colosseum, it has time slots and you're allowed a 1v1 battle with one music and one battle gear each. And Agitos is the announcer, so everyone can come and watch as entertainment. And this kind of goes to show how violence is incorporated into the underworld culture. Right before the Colosseum thing, people were just like actively dueling in the streets, and that was an acceptable means to, deal with your issues. But with this rule in place, it one takes it out of the streets and into the Coliseum. But there's still that element of you want to come watch the violence, you can. And so, it like clues us in a little bit into underworld culture. And we also get the information of if you break this rule, like, if you don't bring your issue to the Coliseum, or if you stand up or back out of your duel, the punishment would be banishment. And that's how the like executive enforces this rule, right? If you don't follow it, banishment. And then the last piece of lore we get in this episode is the introduction of Almar's new creation, the giant robot. And so you can tell it's new because there's a lot of confusion surrounding, is it a creature? Is it a battle gear? What's happening? Right, both in the Colosseum and with players. And we also learn that it's controlled remotely through these like arm and leg bands, and also that Almar is continually improving upon his design because he already has the second version ready to test. So, isn't that interesting? On to fun facts and other notes. What's on the menu today? We have milkshakes in a fancy glass, and in this episode, we get some familiar faces. So at the Fernal Inn, we get some cameos. At one table sitting together is Krek, Perithion, Cougar, Rothar, and Jigarex, and at another table we see Clasp and Ghoul. You know, those are some cameos of fellow underworld creatures that you can get cards of. And, incorporating them in this Fernal Inn establishment, I think really helps to flesh out the world of the underworld, that these are just people that go about their lives. They have to eat too. And it's interesting. It's kind of like, school lunch of like, which table are you going to sit at? Are you going to sit with Kraken, Perithion, and Cougar, and Rothar, and Jigarex? Or are you going to sit with Clasp and Ghoul? Or are you going to sit at the other table that we don't recognize anybody? You know? So that's a fun fact. We get these cameos. And we also get a cameo from Therax, who he was introduced, back in the Yakus episode because Yakus kept pranking him. And I hate to say this animation change is a little bit cursed. Um, yeah, so this is what he looks like in this new animation change. So that's fun, I guess. And finally, I would say I noted that in this episode, Kaor has always been fond of Kaz, but this episode really solidifies that they have a rapport, that Kaz was just able to go up to Kaor and say, hey dude, is there anything you can do to get me out of this? And Kaor was honest as a leader, like, no, if I break the rules for you, then what's the point of having rules? But I think it really emphasizes that at this point in time, Kaz and Kaor have a working relationship, they have a rapport, they know each other. They're no longer being introduced and building trust. They they have this rapport. So my final thoughts on this episode are, this episode is more of like an informational episode. We get the information on this new battle gear that maybe we'll see again. We'll get information on the underworld and its culture and, who Hammerdune is. And honestly, like this episode, I think is fine. It's not necessarily one of the exceptional or exemplary moments that I would point to and be like, this is my favorite chaotic episode. But I think it does the job. You know, it's memorable. You remember who Hammerdune is, but it doesn't stick with you in like theme or lesson or creative plot setup. It's just, I would say it's fairly normal, it's fairly average. We're going about our day in chaotic and seeing the sights and learning what we can learn. So, yeah, that's how I feel about this episode. With that, let me know how you feel about this episode, if there's anything I missed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.